Oh, I don't know. I think the president might still be running his press conference. It is Friday night. I'm sorry. Welcome in.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
It is a pleasure to have you aboard here on this Friday evening. And are we having a little discombobulation to start the program? Do you want to bust, Kevin? No, you don't want to bust. We never bust the show. We've never busted the show. That's a lie, too. Welcome in. Friday nights, we're a little more freewheeling. You know what it is? We tape 2 shows on Friday night, one on Thursday for Thursday and one on Thursday for Friday. And Mr. Sasse doesn't have his microphone, and I don't even have my earpiece. So it's like one of those, but that's okay because everything has been a kind of a train wreck today. You know why? Because we have been trying to follow the Donald Trump press conference, which you might have seen or heard about yesterday. Remember, we cannot, here's the liability of the Friday program. We can't react to anything that happens on Friday because we tape the show on Thursday. And as we are taping this Friday night show, Donald Trump is speaking to the nation at a press conference. And so I shall bring my guests on here momentarily from Bryant, Gary Sasse, and Joe Fleming, who's the leading pollster here in Rhode Island, just to talk some shop and some Washington and Rhode Island events and politics. But let's just get a little flavor as to what Mr. Trump has been saying so far.
And then right after that, you prepare yourselves. We'll do some questions, unless you have no questions. That's always a possibility.
No, that wasn't a possibility. Here's some more.
This has become so dishonest that if we don't talk about it, we are doing a tremendous disservice to the American people. Tremendous disservice. We have to talk about it to find out what's going on because the press, honestly, is out of control. The level.
Yeah, so it was Beat Up the Press Day, and there was one more as he's trying to explain to everybody that all systems are firing.
Turn on the TV, open the newspapers, and I see stories of chaos. Chaos. Yet it is the exact opposite. This administration is running like a fine-tuned machine.
Fine-tuned machine. Sorry for that, Black. It's just the way the show is going to be. We'll professionalize this thing as we move along. Now that we've got these esteemed gentlemen here, Joe Fleming, Gary Sasse, guys, welcome. Nice to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know what America and the media are talking about. This is a well-oiled machine running out of Washington right now.
Well, in the president's mind, it is. I think a lot of other people think it's been a very rough start for Donald Trump and that he needs to restart his presidency and really start to smooth things out. I think up to this point it's been very rough. It's not what he expected. However, if you were a big Trump supporter, at the beginning you were very happy what was happening. He was keeping his promises. He was going after the immigration. He was trying to do the economy. He was basically trying to do everything that he said he was going to do. But now everything's stumbling.
I love you.
And they need to reset.
I love Joe Fleming. You are able to put everything in category. Because that's how you operate. You take a pulse of the people, you get the pulse in category, and you instruct, when you consult politicians, to address the category. And so you speak in categories.
Yeah.
And you can't argue that, Gary, right?
No, you can't, but it's interesting because I look at it just slightly differently. So Trump has been in office 4 weeks now, roughly. First 2 weeks were pretty good. His initiatives got out, the executive orders, the pipeline, the regulatory reform, and then he issued really a botched executive order on the travel ban. Forgetting the policy, it just was a botched executive order. And as a result, the positive moves that they're trying to make are overshadowed by a number of unforced errors, and those unforced errors are complicated by misplaced pettiness. And that gets back to a lack of structure and staffing. You need somebody in charge of the White House that can stay on message, make sure things get vetted properly, walk into the president's office and say, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, reconsider it. And that's what's not there right now.
I think you have 4 people basically trying to do exactly that. The chief of staff, his son-in-law, Mr. Bannon, and Kellyanne Conway.
You just named 4 people who've never operated
correct
in that environment
correct
ever.
But all 4 of them are basically trying to get the president's ear and dictate what's going on. As a result, they're going in all different directions. Gary's correct.
Yeah, you know, there's a saying that we teach in business school: get the right people on the bus, get the wrong people off the bus, and get the right people in the right positions. They haven't done that yet.
And then you put young Mr. Miller, who's his policy guy. He ends up on the television shows last weekend, and he looks like he's from right wing out of space. This thing is it's crazy. But when you talk about people being happy the first couple of weeks, and then Gary, you confirm that thought with some initiatives. Even I'm on the radio and here had to say, okay, well, this is what he promised. I don't know why anybody's surprised about this, and this. But do you have a sense that this thing is starting to erode in terms of confidence out there because of what Gary reports and this post-2 week category success?
The presidential election was very divided. I think the country is still very divided. I think if you're a Trump supporter, you're still on board with him. You're still very happy with what's happening. If you're anti-Trump, you're very upset with what's happening, and that's what we're seeing. You look at the job approval ratings. The average on Real Clear Politics is about a 46% favorable rating, 50% unfavorable. The president in his press conference announced that Rasmussen said it was a 55% for favorable. That's more of an outliner. So at this point, I don't think there's been much change since the election. His supporters are still there. The question is, if this behavior continues for the next 6 months or so, will his supporters start to question what's going on?
See, there's an inside game and an outside game, and I agree with Joe. I think the outside game is status quo since the election. The people that didn't like Trump still don't. The people that liked him and voted for him still do. But what's happening is you have to govern, and there's beginning to be an erosion of his ability to govern. And so the more mistakes are made, the more difficult it becomes for him to fix up Obamacare, to get big tax cut bill, to deal with the economy, because 52% of the polls I've seen, Joe, and correct me if I'm wrong, think that the most important issue is the economy. And in this whole conversation the last 2 or 3 weeks, he has lost initiative on the most important issue to the people. And that, when the congressmen and senators see that and they have to go back home, that causes concern.
And the polling showed that in the Real Clear Politics average of how is Donald Trump doing with the economy, 46% approve, 39% disapprove. So he's doing a little better there than his overall rating in some ways. But again, that's going to erode if he doesn't get back to his basics, which is jobs in the economy. He doesn't want to be talking about Russia and Mr. Flynn at this point. He wants to get back to what got him into the White House and do what he was supposed to do. Right now, that's not happening.
You know, you say these numbers are pretty much status quo on the outside game. Even on my phone lines, I've heard the Trump people who've tortured me for the last year or so having much less of an argument, at least. Now, listen, everything is cyclical. I mean, he could flush some of this. I don't know how, but he could flush away, perhaps with a new executive order, the problems that he has in the courts right now. He could, you know, make some. I think the ultimate test is going to be, God forbid, that we have a real test to the nation's security, right? I mean, isn't it always the president rising and falling on keeping the nation safe for the most part?
And that's why when you look at his people in his cabinet, I think he's made some very good appointments. I think there's a strong Secretary of Defense. I think the Secretary of State, he has no record yet, so we don't know, but he certainly has credentials. Great pick at Homeland Security. He had a terrible pick as his national security advisor, because the role of the national security advisor
is to collate it all.
Is to collate it all. He is the honest broker between those powerful agencies. And if the president's not served by an honest broker, he can't make good decisions, because they're going to be slanted decisions. And so if he can fix that, if he can get Vice Admiral Harwood in, who I think does have the prerequisite resume, that can come together very quickly. Because I remember with the first month that Bill Clinton was in office, there were a bunch of kids wearing T-shirts running around the White House eating pizza. And so it's only been 1 month. Let's not lose sight of that fact.
All right, but here's the question that I have. What is the Russian thing going to, A, do to the polls, the nation's confidence, and the president's tenure? We'll talk about it coming back. Stay with us.
Michael Flynn, General Flynn, is a wonderful man. I think he's been treated very, very unfairly by the media, as I call it, the fake media in many cases. And I think it's really a sad thing that he was treated so badly.
Guys, as I said last night, I've been saying for 2 days on the radio, Mr. President, the media didn't fire the national security advisor.
No.
You did. What?
He had to go. You can't have a national security advisor lying to the vice president. No. That's just not going to work. The other thing about Flynn, and I respect his service, he was a hero. The work he did in Afghanistan and Iraq for intelligence work was really quite good. But he's the classic case of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. He didn't have the background and temperament to do the job as a national security advisor. He has strong opinions, fine, but he had trouble.
You got a sense of that during the campaign when he was making speeches that were completely out of what you would think the temperament of an NSA would be,
and,
right?
You know, he's no Condoleezza Rice, he's no Henry Kissinger. You know, you want somebody, a national security advisor, who can bring the pieces together, understand the implications, explain them to the president, you know, broker deals between the security and foreign policy agencies. And this guy didn't have the temperament. He was probably a great intelligence officer, but he was miscast in the role the president put him in. And then when he lied, that was the end of the game.
They could have handled it differently too. They could have addressed it right away and say, Mr. Flynn made a mistake. He said he talked on the phone to the Russians. He shouldn't have. We messed up on it. Instead of basically trying to, you know, tell the vice president, no, I never spoke to them.
I don't think that happened, Joe, because my instinct is that Donald Trump.
I'm saying that's what he should have done.
Well, I think Donald Trump was completely aware of what Michael Flynn's MO was. Now, did he have a note on the exact time that National Security Advisor 2B was talking to the Russian ambassador about relaxing on sanctions, or whatever specifically he suggested?
Right.
Now, the FBI reportedly says they talked about sanctions, but it's not alarming that which they spoke about. That's the current take. The FBI still got ongoing investigations, and that's the leak. That's not a formal statement from the FBI. But this notion of lying we've all bought in hook, line, and sinker to this notion that Flynn didn't inform Pence. Pence went on TV on January 15th on Face the Nation. The folks in Intel went, what? Because they've been monitoring. They brought Flynn in. 5 days later, the acting attorney general calls the White House counsel, and Mike Pence only learns about it. I'm not ready to assume that any of that is true.
No, but there's two sides to that story. You would expect that during a transition, the incoming national security chief would be speaking to foreign governments.
Networking crazily.
Absolutely. And what we know at this point is there's an investigation going on. It's a very important investigation, and I would agree with you. We need real facts to draw conclusions. We don't have the real facts yet, but what we do have, and this is what's very disturbing, when the president compared our country in terms of moral equivalency to Putin, that's what raises the antenna. Because I would never accept for a second that we conduct our business anywhere resembling the way Putin runs Russia.
And in all of that ideology, or maybe it's not ideology, all of that at least new doctrine that he's got here, I think is reflected in the play-by-play of this saga. Nothing should surprise anybody about what happened here. And if in fact the National Security Advisor didn't do anything wrong, why'd they pop him? What?
I mean, everything that's happening now doesn't surprise me.
Wasn't it a trust issue, by the way, 2 days ago? It was a trust issue, and then yesterday morning, it becomes, or two mornings ago, it becomes the media's fault.
Right.
Following this bouncing ball is very difficult. When, Mr. Pollster, will that start to erode America's confidence?
I think they're going to give him like the 100 days before we start seeing erosion coming. They're going to see if he can restart his whole administration and give him another chance. But I think at some point it's going to hit the fan, as we saw that with George Bush. His numbers started to go down when everything started to self-destruct, and it never came back up. I think with this president, he's still around the 50-50 mark right now.
You're talking about Bush 1 or 2?
Bush 2.
Well, he got reelected.
Yeah, but the second term, his numbers went way down, never came back up. Even Bush 1, he had like a 90% approval rating after the Iraq War, and he lost to Bill Clinton. So, I mean, the numbers do change. The numbers can go back up. Right now, people are giving Donald Trump the chance. I mean, we're in New England very much more towards Democratic. However, I think in parts of the country, they're happy with some of the stuff they're seeing. But the Russian stuff could be Donald Trump's Achilles heel.
Achilles heel means what?
That it could possibly bring him down a lot If he wants to run for re-election, it could give him a lot of hard time. It's going to be a harder time to get things through Congress if Congress doesn't have trust in him. That's what's going to happen down the road.
The impeachment word is already floating out of elected officials' mouths, and I think we're getting over our skis there.
I think you are too.
Yet, this is such an important matter, this Russian relationship, and his financial relationship with Russia, unarticulated, denied, financial records still not available the way they should be, tax included. The kinds of hearings that they're talking about now, independent counsel demands and unicameral joint sessions, there's going to be a lot of heat.
But that's why it's important to let the investigation go forward. We have two legitimate investigating arms right now. You know, one is the FBI, and the second are the intelligence committees of the Congress, which are bipartisan committees. They have all kind of subpoena power. They should be given a reasonable amount of time to get the facts out. If there are no ticking time bombs, or no big ticking time bombs, then Donald Trump, like any other president, is going to be judged on how he handles his first crisis. When the first foreign policy crisis comes up, if the American people think it's handled well, this will be intramural activity. If it's botched, then this gets amplified.
Yeah, that seems to make sense. Intramural activity is a really good way to point it. Kev, give me, if you can, the circuit court piece of audio here, because how he remedies this travel ban situation, I think, is important. Please play that. Thanks.
When they see the result, they already are. I can tell you that. Extreme vetting will be put in place, and it already is in place in many places. In fact, we had to go quicker than we thought because of the bad decision we received from a circuit that has been overturned at a record number. I've heard 80%. I find that hard to believe. That's just a number I heard, that they're overturned 80% of the time. I think that circuit is in chaos, and that circuit is, frankly, in turmoil.
Again, first of all, I don't know what the 80. Well, I don't have a chance to look up the 80% number. But he also made some other numerical representations.
Yeah, he said today he got 306 electoral votes, the most electoral votes since Ronald Reagan. 4 years ago, Barack Obama, I think, had 332.
He deals with approximations. We call that estimation.
That was brought up to him, and he said, well, I was given those numbers.
Well, Joe Trillo, you know, the guy who co-chaired Trump's campaign here, has said to me, we don't have it to pull out here, but he's sitting right in that chair, Joe, and I said, what your problem is that you listen to what he says. You can't worry about what he says. It's what he. I said, what is it? It's the concept. If you get mired down in his words, you're gonna be screwed up. So is that the way the country's got to react to this entire thing?
I think there has to be respect for the institutions. I didn't agree with the decision of the Ninth Circuit Court, but it's the Ninth Circuit Court. Respect it.
You didn't agree with what? The stay being maintained? I mean, it's not like they they didn't make a decision on the merits.
I think there were standing issues that I questioned of who had standing in that case.
Whether the state of Washington did.
But I think Alan Dershowitz hit it pretty well on its head. There were obviously serious flaws in that executive order. It was poorly drafted, wasn't communicated well, and I think there were some really violations of practice. And so Dershowitz said something real simple: rewrite the law, take out the portions that are problematic. If a person has the right to be here, then there's not a travel ban. If a lady or a gentleman have a green card, they can come in this country. And so those kinds of things clearly went beyond the pale. It's not that difficult to think, to correct. And part of the problem, and I can't get into his head, is to say, okay, the executive order wasn't perfect. You know, we can fix it. I respect what the court did. You know, thanks for pointing out the problems, you know, with the law, and issue the new one. It would have had the impact that he wanted.
He floated out that he might. At the same time, it runs counter to what his MO is, which is that any rewrite is a redraft, which means the first one was a mistake, and that's not. He's like Fonzie; you can't see wrong, right?
But in government, before you pass a bill, there are 1,600 markups. You start out with a piece of legislation, you have hearings, and it goes to markup, and it changes.
You need to explain that to the president because he sees it as a mistake that needs to be
But
corrected.
he's a
and he doesn't like to
businessman.
admit
He's used to
mistakes.
saying, I want it this way, and it gets done. Now it's a whole different world.
Well, it seems to me he needs to stay out of the courts as best as he can with this particular situation. Not that he can't win at the Supreme Court at some level on the merits and go in a different track and hope another circuit is the track for appeals and all that kind of thing. But this is a dangling thing over his head that is really minimizing his abilities to do other things.
Just
don't you think?
rewrite it and put it behind you.
But
That's the fast way to go with
We
it.
have a new kind of government in this country right now. This is Exhibit 1. Exhibit 2 is if another executive order or if a law passes, interest groups will go to another court and try to stay the president's action, particularly if it's an executive order. And you do reach a point of gridlock at a certain point where it's difficult to move forward and govern if people disagree. And so
well, look, the executive branch has the right to run the security of this country. And if he needs 90 days to 120 days to study vetting, then he needs that time to study vetting. Write the executive order properly, and no matter who comes running to the court, will be told, sorry, no.
The thing we got to remember is these next 4 years, we're going to have a very unconventional president. We're not going to have a traditional president. We're going to see things done differently. We're going to see somebody out there saying what he thinks, not holding back. And we've been seeing that even his press conference that was held on Thursday. He's going to do what he wants.
All right. This segment ran long. I still have to break, don't I? I love talking to you guys. A couple more minutes left. Stay with us. Listen, Gary Sasse has written a very interesting piece about Republican governors and the governing trend there. Go to foxprovidence.com and see the link to Gary's article, which I think we will talk more about soon on the radio on WPRO weekdays 3 to 6. We only got a minute or so. Things here at home. Governor Raimondo's got a U-hip problem, the likes of which are... Can she work her way out of this and maintain electability?
Well, I think there's a possibility she can do that. I mean, she's apologized yesterday. She's taken the blame. She's changed people over there, but it's going to take a long time to turn around. I mean, that's not the first computer problem we have. We have the DMV. And also, people forget, last year the big thing was the income tax. Right. Is that going to happen again this year, or have they fixed those problems? If that happens again, that could have a big impact.
Listen, you ran the administration, you ran revenue. I mean, you run it all. How big a screw-up is this?
Oh, this is a tremendous screw-up. Having a project that was $135 million go to $364 million without an explanation and transparency, and then knowing what the problem was for 18 months and not correcting the problem, it does raise...
Well, they would say they know the problem for 5 months since the launch.
Oh, they've known the problem much longer than that. That's why they kept on putting additional money, because the program would be kept on expanded.
Right.
But the handling of it, raises concern about her competence as stewardship of state government, and so I think it's incomplete at this point, and we'll find out in a few months. But it does put in question her ability to manage the state government.
And when you have to say you're sorry, Love Story says love was never having to say sorry. I like it because it's honest.
Right.
But opponents cut, splice, and ram it down your throat
right.
come re-election time.
But she faced it. She could have faced it possibly earlier. She made changes over there. She's going to cite those types of things that she's trying to address the problem and fix the problem.
All right. Good to see you guys. Keep polling.
Oh, yeah.
Let me know if the numbers go down. Good to see you. We'll have you on the radio soon.
Okay.
Be right back. All right, you folks have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday at 3 here on WPRO. Well, actually, we'll see you. Am I off Monday? This is the kind of day it's been. I don't know whether I'm coming or going. So all I know is this. I wish you a great weekend. And one way or the other, it'll work itself out. Good night.